Kia ora to all of you, and in one of the 11 mother tongues that I come from, I'd have to say siabonga to all of you, and that means hello. I'm Karishma, the founder of Karishma Design, and I was just told earlier on today that before I started my talk that I should tell you why the company is actually called Karishma Design. So he's not in the audience right now, but I'm going to share the story with you. So Karishma is my name, and it is not usually a name bestowed upon a female. It means miraculous, or to be a miracle, or perform a miracle. And I was given this name against cultural tradition. And when I decided to create a brand based on economic empowerment and a value system imaging the world that I wanted to see and be a part of, it felt like we needed some miraculous action. Hence, Miraculous Designs. And this is why the brand is named Miraculous, or Karishma Design. The chop behind was bestowed upon us by a very incredible artist in Taiwan in the early 2000s. He's a Shufang artist, so a Chinese calligrapher in Taiwan, and at the time was 86 years old, preserving the art from China. And when he met us and talked to us about what we were doing as artists, as calligraphy students, he said to me, "You're a free spirit. You should just write in a free-spirited way." The name Linghuan means to be a free spirit. The orange color is the essence of my African heritage. It's the power and the vibrancy and the fire of what is Africa. So this is the encapsulation of the brand that I'm going to talk to you about, and this is why it is a story of economics and empowerment of ethical trade. So where does the story begin? It begins in South Africa, growing up in the beautiful, lush green hills of a confined apartheid world, where segregation, gender inequality, separation, adversity, entrepreneurship, creativity, recycling, and recreating was an absolute norm. In this world, riddled with pain, riddled with injustice, was a pure feeling of entrepreneurship, of raw creativity, creativity that was almost, a necessity, but a norm. So this little girl, as me, at 4, giving a speech at my kindergarten graduation on anything can be everything, and all we need to do is imagine it. No, I had not read Dr. Seuss at the time, but I think I was channeling it indirectly. So my childhood was all about being creative, was all about industrial entrepreneurship. It was from making toys to creating clothing to making art out of everything. In fact, when I was 5, I was barred from scissors. And I was given restrictive access to a glue gun, to Prit, which is a glue stick, and staples. This dress that I'm wearing was an Indian outfit that was made from a bedspread. I envisioned the bedspread, and I tried to pin it around me. I'd already destroyed half the bedspread, and that's why I could only have a 4-year-old's outfit. And that, of course, led to my ban of the scissors. So this was created for me by my grandmother. um, with lots of knickknacks that she would collect. And of course, half the bedspread made a little tiny outfit. I have to say that, the story of South Africa, where in my childhood, I made my own toys with the local kids. Now, I did not have a story of poverty. I was the rare, privileged few. I was the granddaughter of a philanthropist, an entrepreneur of note, and a social justice warrior. Because he, knowing that he could not change the government, decided that every single worker in his sugarcane fields, which were hills that encapsulated hectares of land, will be educated in those fields. So when I decided that my favorite game was to play toys and dress up with all the little kids on the farm, and my second favorite game was to emulate all my aunts and uncles and be a school teacher, my grandfather was on it. And he was on it because what I didn't realize was that whilst the kids were teaching me craft, I was teaching them how to read and how to write. And that was the exchange. And that was where this passion for design and education blossomed, which, of course, took me down a path of studying design and being one of the first 5 privileged few in South Africa in 1995 to be accepted into the leadership program of our biggest and largest retailer in the Southern Hemisphere to date. I think 20 years later, maybe it's safe for me to say the name, and that's the Will True Group. Some of you may know it as Country Road, David Jones, Countdown, I think, and the likes of. But I worked for Truworths, and I was the first Black person or person of color in their design team. And I, of course, felt, here you go. This is my dream being made into a reality. All I've ever wanted as a child was to design beautiful things and to beautify everything around me. And of course, I knew that I had to empower and inspire people, and this is what I was going to do. And here I am, making this change and living by my example, living the dream and showing that it was possible. And then I went to China. My first sourcing trip, 22 and a half years old, 1998, March. Denim designer for a brand called Outback Red, the mainstream brand of the company. And we were pioneers in shifting production and desecrating our beautiful, thriving industry in South Africa. Well, we didn't know that at the time. We were just, young, impressionable designer. I go to China, and of course, because I worked in corporate, I was not allowed. I did have photography, I did take photographs, but when you leave the company, you take nothing with you. And of course, that was in hard copy at the time, so you do take nothing with you. So this is of a friend's stock photography, but it is an actual photograph. And what I saw appalled me. And I must say at this point that what appalled me was not the environmental impact, even though I was exposed to the environmental impact. It hit me from a human perspective. I walked in, and immediately I had to wear a mask because I couldn't breathe. Do you remember the mud-wash jeans of the 90s? That's what I went to see how they were made. I went to see how I could cut some distressed denim and how it could be created in a machine for me, and we could then buy 5,000 units. The price of that was blue-stained hands, people coughing sludgy mucus, children, pregnant women, probably with deformed kids afterwards, people with respiratory problems, breathing problems, cancers later on. When I tried to talk to them, they would say, oh, everything's fine, we have a salary, but how do you live? No, this is just how it is. We need the jobs. We should be lucky and we should be thankful that we have a job. It's the Lauban mentality, something I knew very, very well growing up in South Africa and knowing that this is how, this was just our lot in life. And that bothered me. And that started this active campaign against what was my dream. On my return back to Cape Town, as I worked longer, this experience just grew. The girls talked about 60-hour work weeks. My son may be in the audience, and he'll tell you about those 60-hour work weeks because he was 3 years old at the time. He slept on the couch of the studio, a glamorous, beautiful studio, I must add, lovely couches. He slept on that couch more than he slept in his bed. We ate junk food more than we cooked. And what did I do this for? A mere, at the time, 4,000 rand a month, an equivalent of 400 New Zealand dollars today. I was a single mom. I raised Keshaf, my son, purely by myself. My rent at the time was 1,500 rand, so 115 New Zealand dollars. The daycare and the school was 350 rand, so $35. Electricity, phone, by the end of the month, I had no money. In fact, I was kind of asking my folks for help. But that still wasn't the cherry on the top for me because I thought, oh, it's just the beginning, maybe it'll get better. But as I continued to work in the industry and go into the factories where we produced our clothing, and as I got to see the prices, I realized, hang on, the t-shirt that we are selling for 89 rand, actually, we are paying 6 rand for. And I'm getting paid no extra money. So for 60 hours a week, sometimes 75 hours a week, if that was even possible, all that I was paid was my salary. It was frowned upon when Keshaf arrived into the studio at 5:30. We used to sometimes sneak him in. I had a great boss, and she would allow him to be there. But I had nowhere else to take him, and I couldn't afford daycare, I couldn't afford night care, so nannies. So it started to sink in that it wasn't just me, it was actually this industry. I was seeing it in all parts, and I was the better one. I was qualified, I was educated, I won 6 awards, and all the rest of it. All that other glamorous stuff that the fashion industry punts. So in one such meeting where we stood up and we talk about all our designs, it's called a design concepts meeting, and usually because we direct an entire company, we have every director, every buyer, and every merchandiser, marketing, and the whole works in front of us. And this was the range to be launched for the summer of '99, going into the millennium. And this was the changing demographic of South Africa. The first time in South Africa where we actually had to consider that we actually had 72% of the population that needed clothes. And we were selling, you may all remember the cropped pant. That's when it made its big comeback. And we put into the department at least 3,000 as a test. And I remember saying, because they weren't doing well, and in this meeting I said, perhaps Mr. Mark, who's the current CEO and the then CEO as well, perhaps it is not a problem of design, but it is a problem of economics. Perhaps, have you watched the news lately that we have unemployment at 65%? The government's almost declaring a state of emergency in some parts of the place. Perhaps people can't afford these clothing at these high prices. To which he responded, your job is to design clothing that is so desirable, matched with their job, and he pointed to the marketing team, to make campaigns that compel you to buy the clothing instead of feeding your children. And that was it. And that was it. That was the end. Needless to say, I took my holiday that millennium, had a fabulous party, and quit in February of the following year, the year 2000, the beginning and the end of the journey that I'm on today. During that time, I'd sworn to never go back into the industry unless it was going to be to disrupt and transform this industry, to actually help inspire and empower the people, the makers and the wearers of this industry. I realized that yes, I had a difficult time, but I had family, I had community. I had that sense of Ubuntu that I'd grown up with. But not everybody had that lucky story. And yes, I may have been the single mom and all of that, but that was still a lucky story. And what really sowed that seed for me was when I left Truworths, I started to travel the world with Keshav and teach, because I wanted to explore other parts of the world. I wanted to explore the practice of design and art in other places. I wanted to learn social justice systems and understand and learn, really learn. And it was a great time in South Africa to do that because we finally had passports that we could actually use. So, of course, I traveled to Europe, and I traveled all over Europe, all over Southeast Asia, and landed in Berlin 10 years after the war, and that is it. That is an absolute revolution for the mind and revolution for my spirit. And that is actually where the vision of Karishma Design, at the time called 2K, came to be. And it came to be because in this city that was kind of like a country like South Africa, you know, there was this entrepreneurship, there was this vigor and this creativity. There were governments supporting artists. There were artisans that were thriving. There were people, musicians, teachers that were embedding arts and culture and into everything that they were doing. This taste of socialism. Listening to the success stories of recreates that were given the $12,000, probably 25,000 euro, I remember, was a start grant. It was Deutsche Mark at the time, though. They were given this money to start these own practices. And that made me see that there was a hope. There was a hope for a slow design company. There was a hope where people didn't have to work 65 hours a week. We just needed to make better clothing that resulted in them buying less and waiting for that clothing, because I was not a designer. I'm not a fashion designer. I'm an artist. Yes, I design clothing, but I design art. And so for me, that concept of conscious art, of draping the body, of creating the personal experience started to manifest. And this idea of social empowerment to create opportunity of disadvantaged communities came to birth. And the story, the mission of the makers, the mission of the artisans, of the wearers behind the clothing, I really believed in that. And I started to realize the reason for my somewhat disadvantaged upbringing. It was to understand the importance of that compassion. It was to understand the importance of building, of sharing, of community. And something else, it's a word in Zulu and in Xhosa called Ifaletu. And Ifaletu means, very simply, your heritage. But it's like Maori, one word that can mean a lot of things. It means to preserve the old, to teach into the future. So to teach the future, you preserve the old. And this is what my grandfather in his legacy in KwaZulu-Natal was trying to do with all the charities that he was involved in, all the children that he was educating. And here I was, and that's what I decided. And that was where we started to make it happen. In my travels, I decided to start bringing in these artisans and these makers and these wearers, and to start, through clothing, to tell a story. And our story was going to be a story of empowerment. We actively decided that we would go into the communities in Vietnam and in India, in Thailand, and the places that we had visited, and in South Africa. Now, I must again point out that photography was very sensitive, because at the time, we did not click everything around us. And with my traipsing hippie lifestyle, I definitely didn't document as much. I was too busy having a good time making things happen. I didn't care about the story. I didn't think I was going to have to stand here one day and tell a story. I didn't think about it. So working with the artisans in South Africa, working with the HIV kids, which is actually one of my personal stories, and it's something we still do. These are the bangles that they make. We can't show you any photographs of them, but we can give you all the details if you're really interested to sometimes meet them. And then this picture here, which literally made my blood boil. That I understood, and I understand why that is happening. I felt it, because I understood where those children were. Those were some of the kids that I grew up with, had my grandfather not been educating their parents and letting us teach them and letting us share their books and sending them to school. And I did not want that to be our story. But that was the empowerment behind how we acted. The focus on the clothing drive and on the clothing that I'm going to show you in the countries that we have worked with was powered to change that picture, to create more of these pictures that were really beautiful. The other story, by this point, traveling, I'm a diver, and at that time I dove a lot. In the early 2000s, you already were swimming with plastic. Bali, Lombongan Island, around Gili Island. It's where the turtles grow, where you often will see turtles and big manta rays. I remember diving across, watching the mantas swim by, and I thought, that's a weird kind of fin kind of thing it had over its head. That's weird. What's that? It's a new species or something? And as I got closer, it was a piece of plastic. 1998. So whilst we didn't start, and the idea didn't start with environmental awareness, part of the Efaletu and the Ubuntu ethos was always impact, was always how you impact. And my grandfather used to tell us a story when he used to force us to plant trees. And the story, 5-year-olds, we don't want to plant trees, but he'd rope all the kids into planting trees. And he'd pay us a chocolate bar. But he said the payment was when he was dead. And I understood, because now when I walk in the farm that I grew up in it's called Redcliffe in Verulam, I think about him. Those trees are huge. In fact, my son benefits from the mangoes, and he just did. Mangoes and lychees from them. And the idea was very simple. You plant a tree because it gives you food. Yeah, the human need. Number 2, it feeds all the life around it, the birds, the beetles, the monkeys. Number 3, it nourishes the earth because a lot of it drops down. And number 4, it keeps the balance of the air, the carbon dioxide and the oxygen. And that's how we grew up. So the sustainability stance was a natural thing, not to buy, not to be wasteful, not to just throw out things, was natural to us. To recycle was natural to us. So of course it became part of the fundamentals of the business. And the next thing is when we realized we were entrenched in social empowerment and sustainability, the biggest thing in the sustainability was to not waste, was to use what already existed so that we can make that impact. And that led us to our design philosophy, and that led us to what we decided we were going to base our business on. And we were going to base our business on what we call the principles of Karishma Design, and we tried to make this our cornerstone our benchmark to measure our practices later on. And the first one was empowerment, growth, and freedom, from maker to the wearer. So that's the overlying philosophy. Economic empowerment through the clothing. Any design we create has to be based in integrity. And that integrity comes from the actual design, the way that the design is formulated. Are we being mindful of the body that is going on? I do not expect everyone to be flat-chested and look like Kate Moss. For me, that is part of the integrity of design, to embrace women for who they are. Because part of the social injustices was being a woman and being told that you needed to wear makeup every day and shave your legs and have a wax and all the rest of it. And I was done with that. So here we go. I mean, by the way, I love getting dressed up. The second one was to embrace the traditions, to embrace the culture. One of the things that bothered me, in retrospect now that I'm an adult, was how we have a view about something and we don't understand the other person's view. And it's very easy, for us to go into places and say we know better. And I was quite mindful of that. And I wanted to be mindful of that. Yet we made lots of errors in this regard we will talk about later in Sri Lanka. So this was one of it. And of course, the economic empowerment through the processes that we are undertaking. And part of our design process and our sustainability clause was to create ageless pieces, to really put energy and effort into the design, that it could be transformed through the ages, for the ages, with the ages, so that we didn't propagate fast fashion. Instead, we propagated mending, loving, and love affairs with clothing. So this was our design philosophy. And of course, based on this, it was quite easy to come up with our business philosophy, or the business model. And the business model are the principles that we are not registered fair trade, but we've always lived by fair trade philosophy and policy. So we're quite simple things, but of course, being a little business, and one of the things I hated and I learned in South Africa was this, we had to follow the rules. And if you know me at all, you will know that I don't like to follow the rules. So as a result, we created a set of principles or actions that would make the foundation, but we also are very changeable with those actions. And so one of it was that we will always empower by providing meaningful work. The designs are challenging, yet simple. The designs have a long last. They challenge the ability of the maker, But that's where the growth comes in. They also use the knowledge of the maker. So it's meaningful, but it is not debilitating. It is an exchange. So the empowerment of the maker all the way to the wearer comes from meaningful work where both people benefit. The wearer benefits by this beautifully made item full of story and full of love and full of positive energy. And the community then benefits because when they pay for these items of clothing, they are paying forward to the development of a community, which is the concept of Ubuntu. The second thing is we look at each community and each collaborator and each artisan and try to deal with them according to what their needs are. So yes, we provide medical support, transport, safe working environment, school funds. But as you will see in Taiwan, we didn't quite do school funds. We needed to do something else. So whilst we have a foundation as a minimum, we don't have a maximum. And because it's a little bit cowboy, we're able to work as the work is needed. You know, make anything from everything. Anything can become everything. So that little childhood mentality of making things happen was what is embedded in the practice. The next principle is always to provide opportunity for the makers to learn and to explore. I am considered one of those makers, even though I don't physically sit in front of a sewing machine. So I learn from them by embracing the culture, by embracing the people. We learn from each other, and we respect and sometimes challenge tradition. You need to, especially in communities where dads tell me that the girls can't work. They're saving their monies for their dowry, so perhaps you should let them work so they can save it a little bit faster, is what I say. Because, you know, the tree story I've just told you, the other story was the power of education. That was something very quickly and very easily every South African understood very well, and many other countries as well. I just speak from my own experience. One of the last things that we do, or last founding things we do, is we empower these communities by setting up the business for them. So I do not own anything. I technically own Karishma Design, a social enterprise in New Zealand. I don't own a production. Nobody works for me. Everybody works with me. How do they work with me? We set it up. So this, for me, and I think this is primarily because of how I was brought up and where we came from, where we were just constantly, it was embedded in you that you just weren't good enough. And that was not because you were a girl, that was on top of it. There was just the psychology of apartheid South Africa, a fabulous design, absolutely magnificent design, such a great work, that we were just not good enough. I remember pushing to get a scholarship in design just because I needed to prove that I was good enough. I needed to win every competition just to prove that I was good enough. And that had to stop. And I was determined in that social empowerment that everybody would own what they do. We'll help you own it, but you will own it. So not quite as fancy as a microloan organization, but somewhat like that. So, how did we do it, and where did we do it, and how did this all manifest? So, of course, the birth and the brainchild began in Berlin, standing observing the wall and meditating one day, and that was in the year 2000. But the manifestation of that brainchild was in 2003 in Taiwan. surrounded by everyone from every other culture other than my own. And you would think, why Taiwan? You know, it is at the time, it was part of the Five Tigers of Asia, and it was the 40-year economic success story. Obviously, nobody needed any help. It always looks like that on the surface. Look at New Zealand, first world country, riddled with issues, social justice. So our story here started firstly with a group of women deciding that it was time that Karishma Design actually created its own label. That the 500 saris that I started a sari drive to collect in South Africa needed to be used, and we needed to do something about that. So in 2003, we started, at the time, a South African company, registered and trademarked to operate in the Republic of China. I like to call it Taiwan. And we didn't have anyone to work for us. At the time, I was writing a fashion column for the largest magazine in Taiwan, and I worked as an educator. And during this time, parents came to talk to me about what I was doing and what I was trying to do, and that they knew a bunch of women who would love to be involved in this campaign, because at the time, Taiwan had moved to China, and it was, of course, the rise of China. But the effect of the rise of China on small businesses was the same as it was everywhere else in the world. And that's where the story began, with two women, Shambo and Sharon. And Shambo's story was that she worked as a pattern maker and a garment, tiny little CMT operation for a big operation, but was let go when she'd asked to work 3 days a week because her son was diagnosed with leukemia. Now, in Taiwan, with the national health insurance, medical was not the issue, but she needed a salary. She needed to support herself. So she worked for me. Rather, she worked with me. And we built this experiment at the time, which was called the Karishma Recycle Sari range. And on the opening night of this collection, remember, we showcase like art. So you buy off the rail as you see it, in a beautiful artistic environment. The range cost us $8,000 with 4 people working for us under their own operation. We sold it at a profit of 15,000 US in one night. People wanted the story. People wanted to know what we were making and how we were making it and where we were making it and what we were doing. And that took us to Thailand. That took us to our next operation and our biggest success to date. Here, this operation is in the downtown of Bangkok. It was an operation. There really is a serendipitous something that works. You know, you walk down a street and you meet somebody and then it just all happens. And that's how I met Sam. Sam turned 70 last year. When I met him, he is actually an experienced tailor and a retired teacher of the art, of the old school couture art, who made garments for the Queen in the day. However, his workshop was failing. He had to let people go for all the same reasons. People were going to more commercial tailors, the industries were becoming bigger, so small businesses didn't have the chance to grow. We did not have to set him up with equipment. We needed to provide meaningful work, consistent work, and a chance to employ the people that he had let go of. Okay, and we worked with Sam, we still work with Sam indirectly, but The thing with this story is that our 8 women that we employed, we re-employed. We retrained because the 4 of them were his old workers and the others were younger people that we needed to teach them how to work with silks and how to work with the delicate fabrics that we were attracting from waste, because we did not have a standard. We just found waste fabric and we created beautiful things. So they needed to know how to work, how to manipulate patterns and how to cut this way. And together with Sam, we trained this staff. This story started in 2004 and this story continues. We have a graduating doctor as one of the girls from the many children that we have educated. Yes, they all are paid fairly. Yes, they are paid continuously. Karishma Design hasn't supported this enterprise for the last few years, but with the impact that Karishma Design had and the growth that we were able to propagate, this business is still thriving. And we've just been invited to come back, please, to work with them. Our last, there's 2 more stories. South Africa is where we went to. Okay. All right, but I will just end it at this one. Yeah. So South Africa was where we went to in 2008. And this was a Black Economic Empowerment Initiative set up by the government, where the government only set up the equipment. This was for the 250,000 people that were made unemployed by the textile industry. And here, this operation, these are new photos, have still been taken out. Still in operation, and we're still working with them. And they are producing for other young designers based on the training and the setup that we helped develop in South Africa. Sri Lanka is where we are now at. The reason we're there is because that's where the waste is. So I can hook you up with fabric if you need it. 3,000 kilos of fabric a week from one place. That's the waste, and that's why we are there. But we are also there because this skill has moved to China, and these people are suddenly left jobless with talent that is remarkable. And this is where our workshop currently sits. They own the business. This is called Bidex. The other one, headed by Tiny, is called the Waterloo Enterprise. The one in Thailand is called Sam's and Girls. And the one in Taiwan, Shambo, the lady with leukemia whose son has sadly died, she is just called Shambo. And she is now very big in the city of Taichung. Every foreigner goes to her. So this is our story. And watch the space. We're heading to India.